and welcome to Watershed Moments. I'm Rhonda Pendell Charles, Alderwoman, City of Annapolis, representing Ward 3. And welcome to Watershed Moments. And we have with us a very special guest today, Miss Lisa Craig. And Lisa is our historic preservation guru with our City of Annapolis Planning and Zoning Department. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Oh, Rhonda, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. We're going to get started, and we'll start from the beginning.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
And the beginning is your early childhood.
You know, I was very fortunate because I was born to parents who actually, my father was born in Italy and came over here when he was only 9, right after World War II. He couldn't speak English. His mother had actually been born in Pittsburgh, but she had gone back to the old country, as they say, because her mother had tuberculosis, and the doctor recommended they go back to the old country. So she met my grandfather there. My father came over here after the war. My mother, who was born and raised in North Dakota, her grandfather came over during the Russian Revolution because of the fact that his mother was concerned that he would be lost in the war. So I have families whose fairly recent history goes back beyond the shores of our great nation. And my mother and father met in California, where they both ended up. And I was raised in a little town called Lodi, California. About 40,000 or so people then, so right around the same size as Annapolis. You know, had a very stable life, enjoyed writing in my high school newspaper and yearbook. I was the oldest and a daughter and 2 younger brothers. And, but I left fairly early. I went to college at 17 and never really moved back home after that. So where a lot of my family, and I miss them dearly, but a lot of my family all live in the same town. I've had some wonderful experiences living in many different places around the country.
All right. Well, thank you for summing that up for us. It sounds like a very stable childhood, as you mentioned.
Very.
2 brothers, younger. Were you bossy?
Oh, yes. I don't think that's changed. I think I'm still bossy. So, but you know, we had a lot of respect for each other, and my family raised all of us to be pretty independent. Hence, why I felt fairly comfortable leaving the nest. But my brothers both work for the family business.
And that was?
My father started a trucking company.
Oh.
He actually never finished high school and went straight to work. And built up a very successful business. And my mother is vice president of the company.
Of course.
Yes, and so a family business, and I was involved early on, a bookkeeper and the like, but Mom had to fire me because I just didn't like filing. And so it was the first and only job I've ever been fired from, but it was a good lesson learned, because sometimes you have to do the stuff you really don't like.
That's true. But you parallel my experiences. My dad and his brother and cousin owned their own building contracting business.
Yes.
And I was the payroll clerk / secretary / receptionist. And I will tell anyone he was the toughest boss I'd ever had. Now, my mother wasn't the vice vice president.
Okay.
But she was in the school system teaching algebra. So, but anyway, so I understand where you're coming from with the family business.
Yep.
Absolutely. So you go off to college.
I go off to college a couple of times. I started my college career, my education in journalism. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you here. It brings back memories. But I enjoyed journalism. I studied that, communications and journalism, for a few years. And then I got into the workforce. I was very much a people person. So I started getting into customer service jobs. And at some point decided, you know, got to go back and finish that degree. And by that time, my mother and I were very interested and involved in collecting antiques, in researching history. My father was a history buff. He did so well. He may not have finished high school, but he loved history, and he got A's in history. So I think I had a history gene in me. And so then I decided I'm going to finish my college degree.
And where was that?
And I went to Savannah, Georgia, of all places. I just lifted
Beautiful
up,
city.
took my dog, drove across the country, enrolled in the Savannah College of Art and Design,
yes.
which was one of the earliest programs to have a historic preservation major, both undergraduate and graduate. And what a laboratory for learning about the history of our nation and for understanding and valuing historic architecture. There are moments when I think about things that I learned there that I use still here today. And I recently had an opportunity, it's been 25 years more since I've graduated, and I was called back to be a special lecturer.
Oh, wow.
On the topic of sea level rise. So,
apropos.
isn't that? So it was really wonderful to go back and meet with the students there and see how much the college has grown and understand that they see the relevance of design and architecture and art and how it ties all together into the places that we live and making them resilient and beautiful at the same time.
All right.
So
Well, oftentimes we do come full circle.
we do, don't
Yes, yes, absolutely.
do.
So the city of Savannah is beautiful.
we? It is gorgeous.
Yes.
It is.
And so you had a great experience there. And from Savannah?
From Savannah, I missed the West Coast. I mean, that's where my family was. And so I came back to the West Coast, but I went to the Pacific Northwest. I had gotten married, and my husband was working to finish his degree in Northern California, in Eureka. And during that time, I was applying for the graduate program at the University of Oregon to get my master's in preservation. But I had to have a job in the meantime. So I started working using my journalism background and started working at a TV station there. So it was a great learning experience, and I got to apply my history. We did little promotions for the news, little vignettes of important historic places in Northern California. And we'd trudge out to the old rail line, or we'd go stand in front of the old depot, or we would stand in front of the first general store that was in Eureka, and we would do promotional pieces, which would give me an opportunity for the community to hear about what was important about these places that still existed and their history and how they serve the community today.
Wow. Now, how long were you there with the TV
Oh,
station?
goodness. Probably just about a year and a half. And then I was accepted into the University of Oregon program and relocated up to Eugene, Oregon.
And how was that experience?
Oh, Eugene was a wonderful place. Colleges towns are great. Don't we love our college towns?
Yes, we do.
So a lot of life and energy, some very good faculty they had there, a very strong regard for the environment, and a real love. The college itself was also historic. So real love for history and some very strong community engagement in projects, and a really good student base that came from all over. A lot of people like to go to experience Northern California and Oregon, Pacific Northwest. So good experience from there, and ended up being offered a job before I even finished school. So then I moved up with my husband to Portland, Oregon.
Now, what did you do at the University of Oregon?
Majored in historic preservation.
And what was your job?
I actually was a graduate teaching fellow there, so I used to teach in the program and support the department. It was, how we kind of get ourselves through school, isn't it? Is we got a job and student loans to pay and all of that other good stuff. But it was a good time living there.
Well, good. Very good. Now, we're going to step back a bit. And you talked about your family and your family history. What were your first memories as a child?
My first memories were really about some moving. It was about moving because we when I was about 3.5 or 4, we used to live across from one of those old canneries, the packing plants, you know, and my grandmother and my mother at early points in their life had worked in some of those. And so they had tomatoes and peppers and all that other stuff that they packed there. Well, I remember my mother and father saying, well, it's time to move. And I remember her putting jars of canned goods in the back of the trunk. And as it turned out, one of the reasons we moved, and perhaps why it was kind of a traumatic experience for me and I didn't really realize it, was as a little girl, I was running across the street to all the truck drivers because my father had a trucking company. So I'd see these truck drivers over there and I'd think that they were friends of my dad. And so after a while, my mother was, this is just too dangerous. We've got too many trucks. We need to move. They were renting the home then. And they said, let's buy ourselves a house. And so they did. And so that was one of my first memories, was packing up to move somewhere else. And after that point, we really, I just had such a great time. I did the same thing at the school too. I like to run off and greet people. So apparently my mother would talk about the fact we would need to go somewhere, and the next thing she knows, I'm out of the house halfway down the street. Thank God for neighbors, you know.
This is
See
true.
these children wandering around.
This is true.
Yes.
This is true.
Yeah.
So you got married and moved up to
We got married.
Oregon?
Was living in Oregon. Got my first job in preservation, running the statewide nonprofit preservation organization, the Preservation League of Oregon. We did some very interesting programs. We would do lecture series, we would do home tours, we would do conferences, kind of what I'm doing right now, some of those things. We were advocates for preservation with the state, with local communities. And then after about 3 years of that, I was offered a position out in Washington, D.C. with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So once again, we moved out. I moved back to the East Coast. And
not as traumatic as when you were a child.
No, not at all. It was wonderful by choice. I didn't run away from anything. I ran to something.
You ran to
That's
something.
Right. So it was a great opportunity, and I have to tell you, people have these impressions when you're not really living in a big city. What's it going to be like for me living in a city like Washington, D.C.? And that's one of the impressions I remember most, getting off the plane at National Airport back then, and looking around and seeing that I could see the dome for the Capitol there. And I thought, what a great human scale city this is. It's not a bunch of high rises, it's really, I can see the historic properties around here. So that was a good selling point. And ever since then, we've lived out here since the late 90s. So enjoyed every minute in every community I've ever lived in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we enjoy having you here.
Thank you.
Now, anyway, you've had several different positions and jobs, part-time, seasonal. At any point in your life, was there a watershed moment? Was there someone who impacted what you decided to do along the way?
There were two people. And I think your family always plays an important role.
Absolutely.
So in one respect, I go way back to everything I do about my father, lessons I learned from my father. He was a very successful businessman. He went by instinct, he went by relationships, he believes in trust and respect. He didn't even believe in necessarily I have to have a contract for everything. A handshake is good enough for me. He ran his business that way, and he taught his children in that same way. So I think I would say that underlying it all is him, But two particular people, and they were both educators in different ways. One happened to be a gentleman who ran the Historic Preservation Program in Savannah, at the Savannah College of Art and Design. He headed the program up. I am inspired by his energy every day. He taught almost all the classes. It was a small college, Maybe we had a couple of adjuncts, but he could teach pretty much every class. He knew everything. And it didn't matter what the day was like. He had energy. He walked back and forth and lectured and talked about this and talked about that. He was an inspiration. And so that was the first person that I thought, I want to be like him. I want to learn this field, and I want to educate others as to its value. And then the second one was my first boss at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Peter Brink, Vice President for Programs. And my first week in the job, I got a phone call from a community group down in Virginia. And they said, you know, this big corporation wants to tear down 8 historic buildings in our community and build a big parking garage for their businesses. And they've already come in, they've disconnected the utilities, and the bulldozers will be here Monday. This was like a Thursday afternoon. So I went in to talk to Mr. Brink, and I said, I don't know, this just, I think it's too late. They should have called us earlier. And his point was, it's never too late. Until the building's down, you can always save it. The next thing I knew, he had made 2 phone calls. He happened to know the wife of the CEO of the company, and she was a marketing person. Didn't work for the company, but she was a marketing person. She knew how negative that story would appear in the paper, particularly if the National Trust got involved. So the next thing I know, they've decided not to tear down those buildings. As a matter of fact, they're going to renovate those buildings, and they're going to use those buildings for some of their own offices. So again, never say never. And that was my second big lesson learned from somebody that has continued to influence me in the decisions that I make every day to day.
It's not over until it's over.
It's never over till it's over.
Until the fat lady sings.
Yeah. Or the bulldozers are crashing through the walls of the building, yes. And the fat lady singing at the same time, you know?
Yeah, so, wow, great. I mean, there's always someone or some people there at the right moment, at the right time.
People are very important.
Very
yes.
much so,
yes.
very much so.
Yeah.
If there was anything that you could have done at that moment to enhance what was going on?
I think we actually did. It was interesting because one of the things that I learned is how important decision makers are, such as yourself. The state delegate in Virginia that represented that area, I picked the phone up and called his staff. And as it turned out, his staff was very sensitive to this issue as well. And the delegate got involved and issued a press release and said that we have great concerns about the loss of these buildings compromising the character of the historic district. And by the way, there are tax credits available, and you should all be using those tax credits. So I think that that's something we need to think about, that you also need to be willing to just reach out to complete strangers in essence, but people who you know are in influential positions, because you might find out that there's some sympathies and empathy there to your cause or your issue.
Certainly. And
you're just not taking advantage of it if you're not willing to be an advocate for what you believe in, even if it's part of your job.
That's true.
You need to be an advocate.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That helps in the advocacy.
It does.
Yes.
It does.
Now you're there, and at some point you come to Annapolis.
I do. You know, it was interesting because it seems like most of my jobs have led to the next job. And so I had actually been recruited to be the State Historic Preservation Officer for the District of Columbia. Never had that experience sitting in a position in a major urban center like that and running a staff. And I thought, you know, good thing, good plan. Let's get something shaken up here, because they were strongly in just a regulatory component. They weren't doing any public outreach and engagement. And I was really interested in working with the entire community. It's a very big, you know, city, the district is, as you're aware. Having worked there for about 5 years, being at the trust, I got to know a lot of the community groups, the neighborhood associations, the ANCs, and said this is a good opportunity. So one of the first things we did was hire a woman, still a great friend to this day, that ran our diversity program. Our issue was, you know, we need to be able to get out to communities. I don't want to make everything a historic district. I want them to tell me what's important about their heritage. Do they want to protect a place, or do they want to tell a story? What do they want to do? So we set up a very good relationship. She would go and meet with different members of the community, ask them what they were all interested in their history. They all wanted to do something about it. As a matter of fact, we did the African American Walking Tour,
Oh.
which was a wonderful program. We did it in partnership with Cultural Tourism DC and the DC Humanities Council.
Oh, wow.
And it was all about place. And that's really what it was about. It's like, where are these places? What do they tell us about us now? What did they tell us about us and the community 100 years ago? So from there, I had a hard time working in the government structure. It was a little too much structured for me there. It's a big city,
Yes.
and they have ways of doing things. And you know, I did what I needed to do while I was there. Then I left and ended up working for Forest City Military Communities as a housing developer, and was working on their historic housing. And that just fell into my lap from an acquaintance I had. You should apply for this job. So I did.
Now, where was that located?
Now, it was located in D.C. as
Okay,
well,
still
their
DC.
primary office.
Okay.
However, most of my time was spent away from D.C. And I was fortunate to work in such wonderful places like Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
That was where we had a lot of historic
Wow.
housing.
I've been there.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So I was working with the Navy, rehabilitating all of their historic officers' quarters and their enlisted quarters. So spent a lot of time working there, spent some time, and it's not as glamorous as that, you know, spent a lot of time in those conference rooms. I'm sorry to say, I was not sitting on the beach all the time, okay? So worked there. I ended up consulting on behalf of Forest City with them on projects, the Presidio in San Francisco, Great Lakes Naval Training Station, where they had these wonderful brick manses that were general officers' quarters there. And then my last major project was the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. So worked with the installation there to rehabilitate their older houses and provide better quality housing for our military families. And rehabilitated, restored in essence, 2 general officers' quarters that were early ranch buildings, large ranches. When the U.S. Air Force Academy bought the property in the 50s, it came with these 2 lovely homes that turned into general officers' quarters.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
How exciting.
Yeah, and then I came to Annapolis.
All right.
After that.
And you came here and...
I didn't want to travel anymore, okay? I just wanted to walk to work, which ain't quite. I still drive 20 minutes, but I can walk around downtown. I have in the heart of the historic district. I hope we always stay downtown and support our local community by having city government downtown.
So when did you come to Annapolis?
That was actually 5 years ago, just over 5 years now. I've had my 5th anniversary.
Yes,
So
I remember.
yeah, it's wonderful. So yeah, I came in and looked at the program and said that, you know, this is a nice start. We're gonna build from here. Okay, we've got a lot of things we can do.
Okay.
And
tell us some of the things you've been working on.
well, you know, many folks are probably aware if they've read the paper or they've been following the news. We're working on an issue related to climate change, which is our cultural resource hazard mitigation plan. We call it Weather Together,
Yes.
Weather Together for short. And we're really looking long term and appreciate leaders like you and the mayor and the rest of the city council who've stepped forward and said, you know, we need to think about this long term sea level rise issue. How are we going to adapt our community so that we can, in essence, live with water? We know it's coming, and we just want to create a more resilient community.
Tell us about some of the partners.
Oh, we've got terrific partners. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers stepped up, brought their expertise to the table, something we couldn't afford to buy. They gave us free, in kind, and we're continuing that relationship with them now on our public works projects. So we anticipate that will be a long-term relationship. Another big partner, obviously, is the U.S. Naval Academy.
Absolutely.
The Naval Academy is at the forefront of planning for this. Believe it or not, the Navy has seen the importance of planning to support their mission, more importantly, planning for the inevitability of when our seas will rise, and they need to make sure that their installations and this very important institution is still in the job of educating our young people to be tomorrow's leaders in the military. So another great partner, and then we've got a whole series of other good partners. The Urban Land Institute has provided us a nice chunk of change to do public outreach. The Maryland Department of Planning and the Maryland Historical Trust obviously are concerned about our historic character and are we planning for its future. And then we are also working closely with other agencies at the federal and state level. The Maryland Emergency Management Agency, because our strong partner at the local level here, our Office of Emergency Management, which is critical, they have brought MEMA and FEMA to the table, which is critical as well. Absolutely. Because they bring money with them.
Absolutely.
So we're all working jointly together now. We're fortunate to have just gotten a grant that we can complete our cultural resource hazard mitigation plan and offer that to the state as a model plan for other communities throughout the state, other historic seaports throughout the country to use to plan for protecting their heritage assets. So that's an important project.
And you had Mr. John Englander here?
We had Mr. Englander
a couple
here.
of times.
We did, and I was talking to the folks at St. John's. Mr. Englander is an oceanographer and an expert on sea level rise. I first heard him speak at the National Preservation Conference down in Savannah. It all comes around,
It does.
and said, he's got the right message. He talks about the science. That's what we care about. Our partners at the Naval Academy talk about the science. Let's get us all together. And we had 3 days with Mr. Englander here based on some funding support from ULI. And he drew 550 people to St. John's for the lecture at Key Auditorium. And apparently that is most people they've had attend a lecture in the last couple of years.
Wow.
So, and I have been getting invitations left and right that have come out of that from small groups, exactly what we wanted to have happen.
Exactly.
Just this morning I met with the Chamber of Commerce Environmental Committee. This afternoon at lunch I spoke with the Watersheds Network. So I think folks are understanding that they all have a role to play in this community.
Absolutely.
And so we're working towards an end planning effort. We have to have something in place with our Office of Emergency Management partners for the state to update our natural hazard mitigation plan by the end of 2017. Right. And we will have it done.
Absolutely.
And then we'll go on to other things.
Absolutely. Now you've got 2 projects coming up in my ward, Ward 3.
I do. Aren't we excited? I'm excited. Okay. One of the projects, and it all has a lifespan, it's all on a continuum. One of the projects, as you may recall, I used to work very closely with the Main Streets program.
Absolutely.
That was one of the great opportunities I had to get that organization back up and running, and now they are in full force and they have a full-time director, and I have jettisoned them off. But one of the great educational opportunities that came out of that was our Walk Annapolis program. And Walk Annapolis focuses on using our architectural and historical heritage to get people to understand a little bit more about the places that they pass by or they work in or they live in every day of the week. So we started out by looking at our historic downtown 4 years ago, and we showcased not only the wonderful architecture, but the businesses. And how the businesses, we have 45 legacy businesses, which means they've been around for 50 years or more. And that's just the downtown. We haven't gotten to Parole yet. We're going to have some others coming up soon.
Yes, we will.
So we decided to showcase them and got one of the brochures. This happens to be West Annapolis because West Annapolis was the second community we did.
Yes.
So we put this together with funding from Four Rivers Heritage and the city. and some small grants we've gotten throughout the years. And we created this brochure, and it's a scavenger hunt for history. So we are very happy to say, and we always launch on Maryland Day.
Right.
So we are launching it again on Maryland Day in Parole. We've got 20 sites identified now, and we're going to do a 2-day event. We're doing it on the 19th and 20th of March.
Right.
And I think we're staging it at the Community Health Center. Aren't we starting
Yes,
it out there?
That's where
we're starting it out there at 9 a.m. on Saturday. And of course, there's prizes. You know, we have prizes because we always have prizes.
Yes, we do.
And
from our local businesses.
That's right, from the local businesses. And everybody's going to get one of these brochures, which will have been newly minted.
Yes.
And it gives a little bit of a history about each of the locations. And it's a scavenger hunt, so you got to unscramble those words and those little rhymes and guess where you are. So no cheating, no looking at the description of history. You got to look at the front side, and go through the walk. And it's good walking for you. You get 9,000 steps in, and 4.25 miles, I think it is.
Yes.
So and I understand that you did the test first. You walked it.
Yes, Jen Jennings and I from City Rec and Parks. We walked it and had a wonderful time. And I saw some things. Of course, when you walk, it's different than when you drive. But Jen and I had gone to the White House several months ago, and then we were invited back to the National Walking Summit. So we've got a little extra twist to our walk Parole, which is the walkability component. So we're proud about that.
And I think we're doing this as part of the Let's Move campaign, aren't we?
Yes, we
are. For the First Lady?
Part of the Let's Move campaign.
So another good example where we have cross-departmental work going on. We're working with Rec and Parks on this project as well, and we're working with the Community Health Center and our Heritage Commission. That's my other commission. I staff both the Historic Preservation Commission and the Heritage Commission, and they're all game and involved in this. As a matter of fact, Jeff Holland sits on the Heritage Commission, and he's the one writing up the little limericks for everyone.
And the Greater Parole Community Association
absolutely.
is one of the sponsors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well. And the Parole Elementary School Alumni and Friends Association.
See, so everybody comes on board.
Everybody's on board for this great project. And we're looking forward to it. And we're asking for people to come out and volunteer and to cheer folks on and to give out water and things like that. So we're looking for a great day.
It will be rain or shine, but it's always beautiful on Maryland Day weekend.
It is. Yes, it is.
So we know it'll be another wonderful event. And we will have an extra number of brochures available. So they'll be in the local businesses. That way, if you don't get to make the walk, you can do it on your own.
Certainly.
So it's certainly self-guided.
And we had talked about maybe next year taking the trolley around.
Oh, that is a great idea, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that works out.
Okay.
All right. Now, with the other project, March the 9th?
March the 9th. Now, it is Black History Month this month, February, but we had a really good suggestion that we partner with the PTA, which I thought was fabulous, to present on Rosenwald Schools in Anne Arundel County. And I don't know how many people know about the Rosenwald Schools, but we do know that we've had 2 here and one that was partially funded through Rosenwald money. And you went to one of them, did you not?
Did.
So
Parole.
You went to Parole.
Yes.
And Alderwoman Finlayson went to the other in Eastport.
Yes, she did.
And Stanton Center was actually funded when the fire occurred at the building. The timing was such that they actually did some rebuilding and used Rosenwald money to help do that, from what I understand. So we've got a little bit of legacy, but Anne Arundel County has a significant number. Many people know of the Galesville School, which is now a community center, and that particular building has been restored recently, and so it has a setup for the Rosenwald schools, and it was really a cutting-edge educational design at the time. Folks may or may not know Julius Rosenwald was the CEO of Sears Roebuck and Company, and he worked closely with Booker T. Washington, who obviously was an important educator and proponent of education for the African American community. And they funded these Rosenwald Schools, a particular design, because they felt that the unique design they developed assisted with the education, and people will hear more about that.
Yes.
I found that a fascinating history. Sherry Marsh, who wrote the multiple property nominations, a terminology we use, about historic Rosenwald Schools in Anne Arundel County, will be presenting. So that's 6 p.m.
March the 9th.
March 9th at Mills
Mills
Parole
Parole
Elementary School.
Yes.
And I think we'll have a good turnout, and people will really learn another layer of the history of education.
Absolutely. And we
and
have door prizes.
And door prizes there too.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And some
I'm looking
giveaways.
forward to that.
Oh, I am too.
That's going to be another wonderful event in this 100th anniversary.
Yes,
year
of our school this
of the
year.
school.
Yes.
Yeah. So look at all the history
Yes,
that goes on.
and we're maximizing everything.
We are, and that is part of our Preservation 50 celebration. Mr. Englander was the first lecturer. Ms. Marsh is the second lecturer. We're going to have a number of lectures focusing on preservation and heritage throughout the year. We have David Brown, who is the Vice President of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, coming in May, which happens to be Preservation Month. And then we'll be doing a lecture from Donovan Ripkema, who is an economist. Believe it or not, economics and preservation go hand in hand. And he'll talk about the value of heritage and tourism and historic preservation to the local economy. So he'll do that presentation in April. And we've got a few others lined up.
I'm sure.
Coming in the end of the year.
It's going to be a robust year.
A robust year.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And we're looking forward to all of this. And Lisa, thank you so very much for appearing on Watershed Moments. And March, of course, is Women's History Month.
Yes, it
so
is.
we're doubly blessed to have you on today.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And we're looking forward to all the great projects coming up and all your wonderful work.
Well, I appreciate that, but I have to read something
All
to
right.
you, older woman.
Read something.
So we went through and identified a number of locations and places that were really important to our community. And I'm going to read you a little limerick here to kind of close things out.
Okay.
One of the places that we're looking at is a certain older woman's home. And to just give you an idea of the little rhyme associated with this, but I think it says it all about you and your role in your community, and that matters, is an attorney dedicated to justice for one and all. This older woman represents parole at City Hall.
Oh, wow.
So thank you
Well, thank
for
you.
your leadership, and thank
Well,
you for giving us the opportunity to work with you
Well,
on
thank
this
you so
project.
very much. We're having a great time, and
We are.
and the community will enjoy it tremendously.
Yes.
And we're looking forward to many more.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for viewing Watershed Moments. Thank you so much.